The UN gang was formed in Abbotsford in 1997 by a group of high school friends from around the Fraser Valley. The founder of the gang was Clayton Ruesch, a white Canadian who grew up surrounded by Vietnamese Canadians and Lao Canadians. Ruesch came to develop an Asian fetish, as he was described as spending much of his time in Abbotsford's Vietnam town, where he loved the fortune tellers he'd find there, grainy bootleg kung fu movies, and Vietnamese girls. A Korean Canadian said of him, "Clay was never white. Maybe he was born white, but his soul was never white." After graduating from high school in 1993, Clayton worked in a variety of sales jobs and opened a restaurant, which soon failed. James Coulter, the best friend of Clayton, recalled, "It started slowly. He started using ecstasy just to stay awake and stay balanced, because when you take ecstasy and you drink, it sort of counterbalances. You don't get high from ecstasy and you don't get drunk from drinking. But as soon as the ecstasy wears off, you are super drunk." Then he just started doing crack, just for an extra high. Maybe it was take the stress away, I don't know. Coulter had moved to Abbotsford in 1996, was working in a warehouse, and spent most of his free time in nightclubs and raves. He stated, "I started hanging out with kids with nice cars. And, they would go to the gym in the day, and that really conflicted with my warehouse hours. And they had a couple of jobs here or there for me, and they would say, 'Hey, do you want to learn how to grow marijuana? Do a week of work, and you'll get a couple of grand.'" Coulter started to work as a petty drug dealer, and in January 1997, he first met Ruesch in a rave in Chilliwack. Ruesch had connections with various Asian organized crime figures in Vancouver via the family of his Lao Canadian girlfriend, and sold drugs at prices considerably lower than those allowed by the Hells Angels, which made him popular with Coulter and his associates. Coulter and Ruesch started selling drugs together to pay for their drug habits. Ruesch began to work for a Vietnamese organized crime figure known as Vu. What began as a loose-knit group of Abbotsford thugs linked to Asian organized crime grew quickly over the years. They began a profitable drug-running enterprise involving helicopters flying across the US-Canadian border, trading much sought-after British Columbian cannabis for cocaine to be sold in Canada. The United Nations gang was founded on May 25, 1997. Ruesch discovered that the Kootenays region was where most of the marijuana in British Columbia was grown, and starting in 1997 began to export marijuana to the United States. The BC Bud strain of marijuana is very popular in the United States, becoming the United Nations gang's principal source of revenue. The journalist Jerry Langton wrote about the BC Bud strain. It was so prized, so valued, that in some places it was actually bartered kilo for kilo with cocaine, a feat unimaginable with any other strain of marijuana. In 2005, it was estimated that there were 22,000 marijuana grow-ops in British Columbia. An article in Forbes magazine estimated in the same year that the total harvested marijuana crop in British Columbia was worth $7 billion, making the then illegal marijuana industry into one of British Columbia's major industries. Besides the United States, the major markets for the BC Bud strain are Australia and Japan. The demand abroad for BC Bud and the other superior strains was such that the vast majority of the best marijuana in British Columbia was exported, with the inferior strains being sold locally. With his new wealth, Ruesch married his Lao Canadian girlfriend and purchased an expensive house. The name United Nations was coined at a party hosted by Ruesch in Richmond, when somebody commented upon the racially diverse crowd by saying, "What the fuck is this? A United Nations meeting." The name United Nations alludes to the various ethnic origins of the members. The gang consists primarily of Canadians of European, East Asian, First Nations, and Persian background. The dominant organized crime group in British Columbia, as in much of the rest of Canada, are the Hells Angels, who only accept whites, and as such, the United Nations gang attracted non-white members, usually second-generation Vietnamese Canadians and Lao Canadians. In the year 2000, the United Nations gang were involved in a notably bloody brawl with the Hells Angels at the Animals nightclub in Abbotsford, which gave the gang stature in the underworld after beating up the Angels. A group of white Hells Angels supporters wearing Support 81 t-shirts arrived and began to bully the Asian patrons of the club, several of whom were members of the UN gang. Coulter recalled, "I remember back in the day, everyone and their dog used to be afraid of anyone who had a Hells Angels support shirt, and you would tread lightly, you would tiptoe around these people, and we were just a bunch of kids and thought, you don't have to be afraid of these people, right? You don't want to be bullied around." Numbers rule, and we had a lot of numbers. As the Hells Angels supporters left following a call to the police, they warned the UN members that they were dead, as they promised to return to the Animals nightclub the next weekend. The members of the UN gang, like other gangsters in the Lower Mainland, tended to come from middle-class families with loving parents, which was not the norm with the rest of Canada, where the gangsters tended to come from working-class families and broken homes. Coulter was somewhat unusual in the UN gang in coming from an impoverished, broken home where both his parents were heroin addicts and bank robbers. Coulter served as the gang's enforcer or mediator, as he called it. It is said he used steroids and working out at local gym to bulk up to 220 pounds to improve his ability to beat up other people. Here, he describes the gang at arrivals. You go to a club with 20, 30, 40 guys, and as soon as you get there, you give hugs to everyone. It is like a family, right? And that is something I never had. I never had a family. So that was my family. The UN gang pioneered an alternative sense of style and recognition that became prominent in Vancouver up until the end of the 2010s. Many UN members would cloak themselves by wearing high-end, expensive, and luxury brands based on California surf trends, biker brands, and accessories that would not typically be assumed as what a gangster would wear. Many youth imitated this style before the end of around 2012. Common items included Merces, high-end activewear, designer jeans, baseball caps, sandals, and name-brand belts. This has become a well-known sense of gangster appearance in BC due to the United Nations. Ruesha stated that on the streets, recognition is power, and sought to promote the UN gang fashion style as a statement of the gang's power. The next weekend, the Hells Angels supporters, together with a number of actual Hells Angels, arrived at the Animals nightclub. Coulter remembered, "I'll never forget. There was the big fight inside. It lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then everyone started running outside. I remember I came out the front doors and there were probably about 5 or 6 different fights happening out on the street. And I seen an Abbotsford police officer pull up, and he gets out of his car and he's on his walkie-talkie and he's like, 'There's HA, there are fights everywhere.' It is like he had never seen anything like this before. Nor had I. That was one of the bigger fights I had ever been in." A group of 70 United Nations members fought and expelled 30 Hells Angels from the Animals nightclub, which was perceived as theirs. Clayton Ruesch borrowed much from Asian culture for his gang. He took aspects of Bushido, the way of the warrior, the fierce code of the Japanese samurai, as the basis of the gang's philosophy, using the motto, honor, loyalty, respect. All the members of the gang are expected to have the phrase, honor, loyalty, respect, tattooed on themselves in Chinese characters, and their uniforms were hoodies covered with images of tigers and Asian dragons, together with the phrase, honor, loyalty, respect in Chinese characters. Coulter stated in an interview, "I liked honor, loyalty, and respect. I thought those were good virtues. You honor your family, you respect others, you treat others the way you wanted to be treated." Ruesch was obsessed with Eastern mysticism. and incorporated rituals based upon Eastern mysticism into his gang's ideology. Members were expected to learn mixed martial arts, especially Thai kickboxing and Japanese jiu-jitsu. Initiation ceremonies were based on those of the Chinese triads. New members would walk under the mountain of knives, as an archway of swords were named to swear eternal loyalty to the 36 oaths of the gang and drinking a bowl of rooster's blood. A senior member was a Dai Lo, Cantonese for big brother, who would supervise the other members who were given much freedom to operate as they pleased. The gang initially avoided the rigidly hierarchical and authoritarian structure of traditional organized crime groups like the Mafia and outlaw biker clubs such as the Hells Angels. Starting in 2001, the UN gang started what the media called dial-a-dope lines. Low-level UN gang members would visit clubs and bars, handing out cards with a name and a telephone numbers for prepaid cell phones, which were changed on an average of 3 to 4 weeks. Those who called the numbers would be answered by an associate who took the order for drugs and had the drugs delivered to the customer, who paid cash when the deliveryman arrived. The dial-a-dope lines were very effective and had been widely copied by 2003. The deliveryman was usually the only ones exposed to be robbed by rival drug dealers or being arrested by the police. Langton noted that the fanatic loyalty Ruesch promoted in his gang led for very few deliverymen to turn Crown's evidence and testify against his employers if they were arrested. Initially, the UN gang smuggled marijuana into the United States via trucks, but after the 9/11 terrorist attacks of 2001 led to American border security being increased, the UN gang switched over to helicopters to fly over the undefended 49th parallel. Unlike drugs such as cocaine and methamphetamine, where even small quantities can be sold for a premium price, marijuana needed to be smuggled in bulk to make it profitable. The UN gang formed ties with American organized crime groups and became one of the main sources of marijuana in Los Angeles and Chicago. On the night of 22nd of December 2002, members of the UN gang, led by James Thifavong, were involved in a bloody brawl with members of the Red Scorpions gang, led by Anton Hudas Mersing, on the floor of Abbotsford's famous Luxor nightclub, formerly the Animals nightclub, with both sides using broken beer bottles as weapons. After being expelled from the Luxor, the fight continued out in the parking lot of the Luxor, leading to Huitas Mersing to pull out a knife and stab Bonlo Thipavong and his brother Suskava Thipavong. Bonlo Thipavong later died of his wounds at the hospital. In January 2003, the UN gang killed the Red Scorpion Edward Skeeter Russell in revenge for Thipavong's death. An audio tape of an UN gang member, Gurpreet Bobby Rihal, emerged with Rihal laughing about Russell's murder, which led the Red Scorpions to conclude that he was Russell's killer. Hudas Mersing was ordered to kill Rihal. On March 13, 2003, Huitas Mersing and several other Red Scorpions went to Rihal's house in Abbotsford. One Red Scorpion knocked on the door of Rihal's parents' house, and when the 19-year-old Rihal opened the door, he was shot in the face. Huitas Mersing then picked up the gunman in his car. The gunman cannot be named as he was underage at the time of the killing. Rihal died of his massive head wound, which caused severe brain damage. In 2003, one of the most notorious known members of the UN gang, Jingban Chan, was arrested for attempted murder. Chan had heard rumors that his longtime girlfriend, Christina Hyuno Yoon, was being unfaithful. On August 2, 2003, Chan received a call on his cell phone saying that Christina had just let in Winston Teo An Bui to her posh third-floor apartment at 6331 Buswell Street in Richmond. In fury, Chan drove to her apartment and, having a key to her apartment, entered it to find the two having relations. Chan pulled out a knife and stabbed Teo several times. In panic, Teo ran out to the balcony nude and bleeding, where he tried to walk over to the balcony of another apartment. Instead, he fell 3 stories down to the parking lot. Theo's fall caused him to suffer a coma, which he is unlikely to ever come out of. Chan was charged with attempted murder and the possession of a concealed weapon. Chan is believed to be the deputy leader of the UN. The BC bud strain of marijuana is considered to be one of the best strains of marijuana in the world and commands a premium price in the United States, where it is one of the most popular and most desired strains of marijuana. Smuggling marijuana into the United States via a variety of methods proved to be very profitable for the UN gang. The main method of smuggling was flying in the marijuana at night via airplane and especially helicopters. Rouet and the UN gang were considered by American law enforcement to be the biggest smugglers of marijuana into the United States. The UN gang smuggled into the United States about 20 tons of marijuana per year, usually by helicopter, making an annual profit of about $120 million. Another method of marijuana smuggling was via airplanes. A Cessna airplane can carry about 300 pounds, fly low to avoid American radar, land in the United States where the marijuana can be unloaded in a matter of minutes, and be back in Canada within minutes. However, helicopters were preferred for smuggling, as planes require a landing field, while a helicopter can land almost anywhere. In March 2005, agents of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement secretly attached a GPS transmitter and an ignition kill switch to a pickup truck being used to smuggle marijuana across the border. In June, ICE agents waited for the truck to come the border and then activated the kill switch. Arrested were 2 Canadian UN gang members, Brian Fuse and Trevor Shoutens. Ruesh asked Ken Davis, the chief American agent for the UN gang, to pay the bail for the guys. However, another UN gang member, Alexander Swanson, was arrested in Washington state with several bags full of marijuana. In September 2005, 2 more UN gang members were arrested in Washington with 1,000 pounds of marijuana in 23 bags. The 2 men charged were 2 brothers from Calgary, Zachary and Braden Mirabak. Zachary Mirabak refused to give his name to the ICE agents and had no personal identification, which led him to being charged with crossing the border with no proper identification. On the 1st of December 2005, a float plane landed in Soap Lake in Washington state. ICE agents found 325 pounds of marijuana inside the plane and arrested a UN gang member, Greg Fielding. On the 14th of March 2006, another float plane landed in Omak Lake in Washington state. The Colville Indian Reservation tribal police found inside the plane 314 pounds of marijuana and about 2,500 ecstasy pills. The tribal police arrested a UN gang member, Kevin Houghton. The sheriff of Okanogan County, Frank Rogers, complained to the American media that too many Canadians were being arrested in his county for smuggling, saying, "We're running ourselves ragged. It's like an epidemic up here. We're running from call to call." On the 23rd March 2006, 2 Canadian women, Sharmila Kumar and Shielen Varma, both of Vancouver, were arrested near Omak Lake with several hockey bags of marijuana in their SUV. Both women were believed to be working for the UN gang. Rogers told the media after the latest arrests, "It's almost like this is nothing to us. It's happening so much it's ridiculous. They come any way they can. It's well orchestrated and they plan this well in advance. It's a daily event." In 2006, an American woman, Jane Girth, while driving on Highway 17, which is almost on the Canadian-American border, discovered along the highway a bag full of just over $500,000, which was meant to be picked up as a payment for a drug shipment. The vast majority of those who smuggled marijuana into the United States were not arrested. That lets you know how much of this was going on. In early 2006, Davis, who turned informer for the U.S. government, visited Ruesh, who told him to take some cash totaling 500,000 US dollars to California to buy 25 kilograms of cocaine to be smuggled into Canada. Ruesh also told Davis to make contact with street-level drug dealers in San Jose, California, who were interested in selling BC Bud. Finally, Ruesh mentioned that he wanted Davis to recruit American truck drivers to smuggle BC Bud and ecstasy pills into Texas, saying he had a client in the Lone Star State who wanted to buy from the UN gang. Davis started to drive from Seattle down to Los Angeles, making 2 trips. In the first trip, Davis took $109,555 in cash to Los Angeles, and the second trip $180,980. Clayton Ruesh expressed much anger about how long Davis was taking to make the drive down to Los Angeles, and warned him that he would send someone down from Vancouver to beat him up if he was not swifter on his third trip. One of the helicopter pilots working for the UN gang was Dustin Princess Haugen. A joint Canadian-American police investigation known as Project Frozen Timbers was launched against the UN gang. On the night of May 9, 2006, as part of Project Frozen Timbers, Haugen was observed flying in a helicopter with another UN gang member, Daryl Desjardins, across the border. Upon landing in Washington state, Haugen and Desjardins handed over 5 hockey bags to 3 men waiting for them in a pickup truck. The truck was stopped by agents of ICE. Found by the ICE agents inside the hockey bags were 300 pounds of the BC strained marijuana. On the 25th of September 2006, ICE agents watched an airplane land at Tieton State Airport outside of Rimrock, Washington state, and arrested the men present. 2 UN gang members, Nicholas Kokoski and Joshua Hildebrandt, were arrested. Found with Kokoski was a handheld GPS device that showed that the flight had begun in Chilliwack, British Columbia, that Rimrock was just a stopping point along the way, and the ultimate destination was a remote airfield in Montana. The history of Kokoski's GPS device showed that he had taken this route hundreds of times before his arrest. The UN gang also smuggled drugs into Canada. On the 27th of September 2006, a UN gang member, Daniel Leclerc, was arrested at the Eureka Rohrer Field Airport in Montague, California on his way back to Chilliwack. Found with Leclerc were 315 pounds of cocaine. A Lebanese-Canadian UN gangster, Ahmed Lou Kawach, whom Ruesh described as a wannabe ladies' man and as an atrociously bad gangster rapper, whose attempts at rapping were unintentionally comical, enjoyed flaunting his vast wealth. For an instance, Kawach owned a red Cadillac EXT pickup truck fitted with 6 TVs in the back and doors that opened vertically. Lou Kawach owned an automobile customization business, but his real job was serving as the UN gang's liaison with Mexican cartels. He was deported back to his native country of Lebanon following his conviction on weapons charges. As Lou could not return to Canada, Clayton Ruesh sent him to live in Guadalajara, where he served as his liaison with the Sinaloa cartel, working out deals to exchange the prized BC Bud for cocaine. As the Sinaloa cartel is one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Mexico, controlling much of the state of Sinaloa, the alliance with the Sinaloa cartel proved to be highly profitable for the UN gang. Lou Kawach's principal contact in Canada was another UN gang member, the Guatemalan-Canadian Elliot Taco Castañeda, who worked as a realtor in Vancouver. Castañeda owned 3 houses in the Lower Mainland, each of which were valued at $1.1 million, plus a BMW automobile, an expenditure that vastly exceeded his sales commissions as a realtor. On the 12th of July 2008, as Castañeda and Kawach were eating tacos at the open-air Tacos de Barbacoa, El Cuello's restaurant on Calle Pedro Buzeta in Guadalajara, a minivan pulled up outside the restaurant, followed up by a group of men jumping out and opening fire with automatic rifles on the duo. Both Castañeda and Kawach were killed in the hail of bullets. The murders remain unsolved. Under the impact of gang wars, greater discipline was needed, and Ruesh admitted in an interview that he ordered the beatings and the torture of gang members who disobeyed his orders, though he also claimed not to enjoy it. As a new criminal organization, the group fought a number of turf wars against other gangs, most notably the Red Scorpions. They also led a turf war against the Independent Soldiers Gang, as it sought to establish itself. Clayton Ruesch forged a close alliance with the Fresh Off the Boat Killers, a Calgary gang made up of Chinese Canadians, Korean Canadians, and Vietnamese Canadians. The Fresh Off the Boat Killers are the rivals of another gang called Fresh Off the Boat. Starting in 2006, Ruesch often met Troy Tran, Billy Lai, and Mark Kim of the FOB Killers. Detective Andrew Wooding of the Abbotsford Police stated, "It became clear from our surveillance that these guys were actually working with Ruesch and taking orders from him as well. At the time, we believed the FK were adopted by the UN, and they were benefiting by getting better access to cocaine through the UN supply lines. And the UN were bringing that sort of oversight and organization and the threat of a larger group that are looking after you." Clayton called Tran and Lee the Seatown guys in a phone call that the police recorded, going on to say, "The Seatown guys, they're fucking anywhere, anytime. Boom, boom, boom." After establishing themselves against the Hells Angels, the two gangs reached a modus vivendi in 2005. In 2004, the police informer Michael Plant recorded the Hells Angel Johnny Punko saying that another Hells Angel, Gino Zumpano, took a walk with Ruesch. Plant reported that his understanding was that Punko was saying a meeting had taken place. One of its biggest rivals was the Hells Angels, but recently the two groups have been working together as some of the UN's high-ranking members became Hells Angels, and also shown by the arrest of Omid Bayani, a mid-level member of the Hells Angels, who was arrested as part of an investigation looking at criminal actions of the Hells Angels. After Ruesch's arrest in the United States in 2008, leadership was assumed by Barzan Tilly Choli. Typical of the gang's members was Omid Bayani, who was born in Iran as a member of the Baha'i faith. The Baha'i face savage persecution by the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which views them as apostates from Islam. His father was killed in Iran, causing the family to flee via Turkey to Canada, where Bayani arrived at the age of 16. At the age of 5, he witnessed his father being lynched by a mob who carved the word Baha'i into his chest before killing him. After arriving in Canada, Omid Bayani grew up in Red Deer, Alberta. Through the Baha'i are pacifists who are opposed to violence even in self-defense. He turned to robbing convenience stores for cigarettes and cash as a teenager. An unhappy ex-girlfriend reported him to the police, leading to him being arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. His lawyer argued that his crimes were due to his troubled youth, but the judge felt the violence of his robberies warranted 5 years in prison. Bayani was known to be a violent prisoner at the medium-security Bowdoin institution, who attacked other prisoners with a club that had the words "goof beater" written on it. Bayani was transferred to the maximum security Kent institution in Abbotsford, where a report declared about him. While incarcerated, he has on a number of occasions tried to provoke staff members into fights with him. It was noted that his actions during one of his offenses caused a female victim to suffer serious psychological trauma. It appears that Bayani does not have a full understanding of this. Omid Bayani was ordered to be deported to Iran upon his release. He instead stayed in the Lower Mainland and joined the United Nations gang. He was part of a Canada-wide drug smuggling network, selling 600 pounds of GHB, the so-called date rape drug, to a fellow Iranian, Mehrdad Bahman, of the Hells Angels downtown Toronto chapter, for him to sell in the Greater Toronto area. The informer Stephen Galt, who served as the treasurer of the Angels Oshawa chapter, told the police about the business relationship between Bahman and Bayani, leading to the police to seize the GHB that Bahman had stored in his garage. The seizure put Bahman into a $100,000 debt to the UN gang and the Haney chapter of the Hells Angels, forcing other members of the Toronto chapter to step in to help him pay off the debt that he could not manage on his own. The information provided by Galt led to the arrest of Omid Bayani in 2007. Upon his arrest in Abbotsford on April 4, 2007, Omid Bayani was spotted with a full-patched Hells Angels member by the name of Vincenzo Sansalone of the Haney chapter, the two sitting in his car. The police would find in Bayani's car a loaded .38 handgun, a hunting knife, part of the leg of a wooden chair to use as a club, a machete, and 600 liters of GHB. Inspector Gary Shinkarak of the RCMP stated, Mr. Bayani, although he is a UN gang member, was known to work and associate criminally with other gangs. The fact that he is charged jointly with a member of the Hells Angels is not a surprise to us, and it is really indicative of the networking and the relationships that now exist in the Lower Mainland and throughout Canada, where these criminal organizations are working cooperatively with each other. Bayani, together with Sansalone, were convicted of trafficking in GHB in July 2011. At the trial of Bauman in Toronto, Bayani attended the trial, watching from the public benches. One of the accused alongside Bauman, Lorne Edgar Campbell, described Bayani as solid. Omid Bayani disappeared in September of 2011 and has not been seen since. On December 20, 2011, he was sentenced in absentia to 7 years in prison. Omid Bayani is believed to have fled Canada for Mexico. The journalist Jerry Langton wrote that the United Nations gang, which had actually been incorporated in opposition to the Hells Angels, were now working for them. The United Nations gang soon into conflict with the Independent Soldiers gang. The conflict with the Independent Soldiers led to the alliance with the Hells Angels. The professional wrestler Ion Croitoru tried to join the Hells Angels Vancouver chapter and was instead directed to join the United Nations gang instead. On February 24, 2007, a double shooting occurred in Vancouver with 2 UN gang members being wounded. Both Ruesh and Jingbon Chan arrived at the shooting scene, and the police believed that Ruesh and Chan were there to interview the victims in order to determine the gang's response to the shooting. On May 8, 2008, former Hells Angels headhunter and UN gang member Duane Harvey Meyer, age 41 and nicknamed DW, was killed, with the funeral held on May 15, 2008. Full members of the Hells Angels and UN gang members were at the funeral, with news stations and police agencies on hand to videotape all visitors. Whenever a United Nations member dies, he gets a special tombstone featuring the letters UN across it. Before a number of its leaders were arrested, the police estimated the gang had 50 to 100 core members in the Lower Mainland area of BC. The alleged leader of the United Nations gang is Clayton Ruesh. Ruesh grew up in Chilliwack, BC. He later moved out to Abbotsford, BC, and then on to Vancouver. Ruesh had an obsession with martial arts and became involved in the drug scene at an early age. As part of an American investigation into drug trafficking on a stopover in Texas on a flight from Mexico City on May 17, 2008, Ruesh was arrested for conspiring to possess cocaine, conspiring to export cocaine, conspiring to import marijuana, and conspiring to launder money, and was subsequently deported to the United States. Ruesh faced up to a maximum of 220 years in prison, but he was sentenced to 30 years and $8 million in fines. He was flown to Seattle to answer to the charges. Other members arrested as part of the international investigation were UN members Chris Neri, Daryl Johnson, and Douglas Vanelstein. Zhong Li is believed to have supplied the gang with guns. On June 9, 2007, the Vancouver Police Department was called to his residence due to an unanswered 911 call. Li answered the door, and the police saw what looked like firearms inside the apartment. A subsequent search revealed a dozen guns, some loaded and some with defaced serial numbers, including automatic and semi-automatic rifles, and almost 24 magazines of ammunition. Li, who had no criminal record, pleaded guilty in September 2007 to all 10 charges. Lee also pleaded guilty to possession of 3.5 kilograms of cocaine for the purposes of trafficking, 900 grams of marijuana, a Panther stun gun, a silencer, and 3 stolen Canadian passports obtained through a home invasion. He was sentenced to 5 years each on 2 of the weapons charges and 2 years on each of the other charges, to be served concurrently. The former de facto leader of the United Nations gang was Barzan Tili Choli, an Iraqi immigrant responsible for a myriad of crimes, none more infamous than his conspiracy to murder the notorious Bacon brothers. The Bacon brothers are believed to be high-ranking members of the rival Red Scorpions gang. Tili Choli's elaborate plot to murder the Bacon brothers manifested in his arrest in April 2009, along with Dylan Hung, Aram Ali, Ayan Kroitoru, Daniel Russell, and realtor Sarush Ansari. 2004 saw the arrest at a Calgary hotel of drug and chemical importer Paul Vincent. Known for his unmatched ability to circumnavigate border security, Vincent was in possession of a vehicle-mounted Bren machine gun, a number of barrels of banned chemicals, and $585,000 in cash. In a lengthy trial, the prosecution sought a 21-year sentence. The trial was brought to close with a dismissal due to an evidence seizure technicality. The United Nations gang came to be involved in a violent feud with the Wolfpack Alliance, led by Larry Amaro and Robbie Al-Khalil of the Al-Khalil family, who both lived in Montreal. Lawrence Ronald Amaro is a Canadian outlaw biker and gangster affiliated with the Hells Angels and the Wolfpack Alliance. He was born and grew up in Langley, British Columbia, and is of Portuguese descent. His father worked as a longshoreman for the Port of Vancouver. At the Port of Vancouver, the British Columbia Maritime Employers Association does not hire its workers, who are instead hired by the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, with the Employers Association being merely responsible for training and paying the wages of those workers selected by the union. The International Longshore and Warehouse Workers Union only hires workers who have been sponsored by a current worker, and in this way Amaro was sponsored by his father to work as a longshoreman. As a teenager, he was bullied, which led him to become a steroid-fueled behemoth as an adult, as journalist Jerry Langton described him. Amaro's arms have been massively bulked up, causing him to have an ape-like gait as his arms cannot fall naturally by his side. Larry joined the White Rock chapter of the Hells Angels as a hang-around in 2002 and became a full patch member, the highest level in Outlaw Biker Club, in 2005. In December 2002, Amaro was found guilty of the possession of narcotics for the purpose of trafficking. After becoming a full patch member, Amaro was described as being one of the most powerful members of the White Rock chapter. He has a long record of being arrested, although not convicted on charges of drug trafficking and manufacturing. Amaro continued to work as a longshoreman with the Port of Vancouver, despite his membership with the Hells Angels. The Port of Vancouver is controlled by the Hells Angels, who use the port as a conduit for drug smuggling. The port is used to smuggle cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin into Canada, while also being used to smuggle cocaine and methamphetamine into Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. Superintendent Mike Porteous of the Vancouver Police stated in 2014, "Vancouver is an international hub for distribution to Southeast Asia and other countries across the water, where, as you know, the prices are significantly higher." Andy Smith, the president of the British Columbia Maritime Employers Association, stated in May 2015 about the employment of Hells Angels at the port, "Yes, we are aware of who they are. They make no secret of it." Besides Amaro, other Hells Angels working at the port included Vince Brienza, Norm Krogstad, John Bryce, and Gino Zumpano. A report by Transport Canada in April 2017 stated that Port of Vancouver is corrupt, as the reported concluded. To facilitate their smuggling activities, OCGs, organized crime groups, are involved in the corruption of port workers and have embedded members and associates within port facilities by way of legitimate employment. That it is certain that organized crime groups and transnational criminal organizations will continue to exploit vulnerabilities at BC's marine ports to facilitate smuggling both into and out of Canada, emphasis in the original. In 2011, 5 members of the UN gang were murdered while in Mexico, which is believed to have been an attempt to cut the UN gang off from their Mexican suppliers. On January 15, 2012, Sal Sabaz, a UN member from Surrey, was murdered in Sinaloa, Mexico, with some $20,000 found in his wallet. The next day, Thomas Gisby of the United Nations narrowly escaped an assassination attempt via bomb at his house in Whistler. Gisby fled to Mexico to escape the Wolfpack alliance. On the 28th of April 2012, Gisby was shot dead shortly after 9 a.m. while waiting in a line at a Starbucks in Nuevo Vallarta. Thomas Gisby was shot twice from behind with a .44 Magnum handgun, which is a type of gun rarely used to commit murders in Mexico, where the weapons of choice are 9mm handguns, .38 handguns, or AK-47 assault rifles. A member of the Wolfpack calling himself Sosa texted Al-Khalil at 10:16 a.m. that day, claiming to have killed Gisby, which led Al-Khalil to text back. Al-Khalil was proud of the murder, though he noted that someone from the UN gang was currently looking to kill him in Montreal at present, causing him to keep a low profile. On June 25, 2012, Randy Naker, the leader of the Independent Soldiers and a Wolfpack member, was murdered by the UN gang in Port Moody. At approximately 1:30 a.m. on May 28, 2023, Amarpreet Samra, aka Chucky, was shot dead in South Vancouver as he left a wedding reception at Fraserview Banquet Hall. He and his brother Ravinder Samra were both in attendance and both aligned with the United Nations gang. In August of 2022, both brothers had been listed by the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit, British Columbia, as one of 11 criminals who could pose a threat to public safety due to links with extreme levels of gang violence. The Samra brothers had been linked with a number of killings and shootings in British Columbia by law enforcement. Investigators believe the shooting was targeted and related to ongoing gang conflict. After expanding to other parts of Canada, the criminal organization became more structured. It adopted a hierarchy system using military ranks. Each province in the country is attributed a commander who chooses different generals for each city. This method of work enabled the high-ranked members of the organization to stay more discreet and safe from police arrests, as their identities stay unknown. According to a 2016 presentation by Sergeant Doug Spencer of the RCMP and the Odd Squadrons, the gang currently has no hierarchy. A large percentage of the original members are either in prison, dead, deported, or have disappeared. Some members still continue to exist, however only living off the United Nations name.
If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.